Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Annmarie Camp, and I am the head of Chubb's European High Net Worth Business Practice. I would first like to say thank you, everybody, for making the time to join our dive-in event today. And I really want to make a special thanks to the three extraordinary individuals who we have joining us in our panel conversation today. Before we start, I want to take a moment to really acknowledge that there's content that we'll explore today that deals with very difficult subject matter, which can potentially be triggering. We'll follow up this event with an email to all attendees with signposting to help for individuals and further information for businesses in how we can all be part of building a braver culture, supporting brave individuals, and be brave ourselves. For viewers with questions, you're welcome to submit them in the chat facility. We will likely be unable to acknowledge every question, but we will do our best to get through as many questions as possible. And we'll also be responding to questions after the event with follow-up information from our panelists, who again are so amazing to have here with us today. I'll take a quick moment to talk about the objective of this event. And the aim is to raise awareness amongst colleagues and employers of the prevalence of and the different guises that domestic abuse can take, the impact this has on individuals, and the role that businesses can take in creating a braver culture within workplaces to destigmatize domestic abuse while supporting our colleagues in bringing their whole authentic selves to work and providing practical support. We'll hear firsthand from two survivors of domestic abuse, and we have the advice of an economic abuse subject matter expert who are here today to share information and their experiences with us. With that, I'm very happy to introduce Kat, who will tell you about herself and her experience. And so, Kat, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm Kat Araniello, and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse and sexual violence. I'm really passionate about this space, and I actively campaign in raising awareness of and ending violence against women and girls. I'm here today to tell you my journey of survival and recovery. And as Annmarie has already put out there will be a trigger warning. So I'm going to talk about some stuff that's potentially upsetting. It's going to be about domestic abuse and sexual violence, and it isn't easy to listen to. So please do look after yourselves listening to this and after as well. So going back to what happened to me, 5 years ago, I was attacked by a man I had just started dating. He was arrested and remanded the day I reported it to the police. He was charged the following day with 7 offences for the attack on me. And to help you to understand the gravity of the attack, I'll let you know what the charges were. There were false imprisonment, assault by beating, criminal damage, impersonating a police officer, and 3 charges of rape. A trial date was set. Now, my experience of reporting to the police was overall positive. My experience of the legal system, sadly, wasn't the same. And sadly, this is something that is systematic, routine, automatic, and happens all the time. Now, my experience of reporting this to my line manager was life-changing. She was simply wonderful. I couldn't go home immediately after making the report to the police because my home was now a crime scene. This is just one example of how my life was immediately hugely disrupted. The police advised me to see my GP, who provided me with a fit note. And my GP was hugely empathetic and suitably vague with what he wrote on that fit note. He knew that would possibly end up on my file with my employer. Now, this isn't your usual absence from work, and my line manager decided to break the rules. She didn't send that fit note to HR, given the sensitivity, and actually she didn't feel that the absence I was going to take should be sick. She took that independent decision to give me some paid leave for a couple of weeks. Now, there's probably some HR people on this call that might think, oh, she should have sent that fit note to HR, she shouldn't be withholding it. But from my personal lived experience, I can say that this kind of sensitive information just shouldn't be out there for, I guess, a number of people to be able to access. So I'm all about how's the most sensitive way of managing data like that. Together with my line manager, we agreed what to communicate about my absence with the team. This really stopped the questions about, oh, why is Kat off? What's going on? And that was hugely important to me because I didn't want people speculating about what had happened. And when my autonomy had been removed during the attack, autonomy was something that I really needed, and I needed to have some control over. So when you're in a state of trauma, the small things really, really do matter. So I put my out of office on with the relief of knowing that my manager had my back, and that was so important. I was then able to focus on attending the police interviews the next day and what was coming up over the next few days. I also agreed to surrendering both my personal and work phones for the investigation. Again, huge disruption. Again, questions from colleagues. Not having my phones also made me feel really isolated and vulnerable at a time when actually I needed more contact and stability. I also really worried about how this would go down with work when people couldn't get hold of me. But again, my manager, she came up trumps, and together we agreed what we would say. We also agreed who else should know of my situation at work. And by then, I could actually see that the real benefit of how having a few key people on side really was protection for me. And that was indeed very, very positive. So we agreed that our director and our HR leader could be told. My employer has private medical healthcare, and my manager suggested that I ring them. I always say that making that first call is the hardest part, but from there on, the professionals just pick up the rest. I was put through to the clinical supervisor and we went through a series of questions, and she diagnosed me there and then with severe PTSD, something I didn't occur to me that I had. She referred me to a psychologist who I was able to access within a few weeks. Now, this support literally saved my life. I went into one-to-one weekly trauma therapy for 3.5 years, funded by my employer. At that first session, I really learned what self-care meant. At the end of it, she asked what I was doing after our session. It was on a Friday afternoon. I said, I have a choice. I'm either going to go to the gym where I could burn off some of that anxiety, or go and meet my friends in the wine bar in the city, which back then was a typical Friday evening for me. She cautioned the wine bar choice and pointed out that a sore head mixed with PTSD is a recipe for the worst kind of anxiety on a Saturday morning. So I took my first step into conscious self-care decisions after just one therapy session. So the gym became my new wine bar. The months that followed were the darkest and most challenging of my life. The police wanted more and more personal information. My PTSD was raging, and I was trying to hold everything together. Being a parent, holding down a job, worrying about the trial that was coming up. I never slept for more than 3 hours a night, and I think I was running on adrenaline. I would probably say, looking back, I was in a state of high functioning and probably needed a bit more time off work, but I was adamant that that this whole situation wouldn't affect my work. I desperately wanted to be at work. I needed to have a purpose. I needed to feel validated, and it was where I felt safe. I could be distracted by what was going on and forget everything. Now, we had to find a way of being able to, I guess, be productive at work and balance my health needs as well. So my manager suggested that I could work from home 2 or 3 days a week to help me cope, because being switched on and in front of people was exhausting. Now, this was pre-pandemic and pre-hybrid working. So that working arrangement did get my colleagues talking. I spoke to my manager and also my director about the noise, and they were so protective of me. And again, I was reassured as to why it was so important that somebody at work had my back. So knowing my job was safe and that I was safe when I felt really unsafe made a world of difference to me and my well-being. Going back to the legal system and my case, I received the devastating news that my case was going to be dropped, like so many other cases. For reference, rape prosecution rates are at 1.3%. And that's just people that do come forward and disclose to the police. Once again, my world fell apart. And once again, my line manager picked up the pieces with me. She again offered me some paid leave, and we agreed what to communicate to the team. And for the first time in my life, I felt suicidal. But knowing that I had my therapy in place and that I had a session coming up meant that I could take those feelings to the safe sanctuary of therapy. And I'm pleased to say that suicidal thoughts were a fleeting feeling. My manager is the silent hero of this story. She did all of the right things, but back then it was without any official guidance. And between us, we unintentionally exposed the lack of support for domestic abuse from our employer and employers as a whole, I have to say, back then. Never one to just let these things happen and go. I decided to use my lived experience to change all of that. So I started asking a lot of questions, and I set up a focus group internally of key individuals who I felt could influence a response in this, including my director, including the head of security, employee relations, HR managers, etc. And during this time, I took part in my employer's mental health initiative called the Green Light to Talk. And I spoke about working with PTSD. This was a video that went out to all of the UK about my story. And it ended up being the platform to open up conversations around domestic abuse and clear that smokescreen attached to it. And I got so many responses from people across the UK disclosing their own stories or just wanting to reach out and acknowledge my situation. It felt that the timing was right, that now we could actually implement something. And that was where we produced the Domestic Abuse Toolkit. If you haven't got one in place already, maybe you could consider something similar, opening up this conversation. So almost you're laying the path for this. Moving on to now, I campaign to change how violence against women and girls is responded to. I was part of a legal challenge with a charity called End Violence Against Women and the Centre for Women's Justice. And we took the CPS to the High Court to try and prosecute them for failing to prosecute rape. It's quite astonishing, actually, that we were prosecuting the prosecutors. This was a big national campaign and received a lot of mainstream media attention, which I fronted. It highlighted the issues around rape prosecution, rape myths and victim blaming, both from within our own legal system, but also across society. Then it enabled conversations that just weren't happening before, including in the workplace. So again, I found sharing my story meant that others, again, could, whenever I tell my story, people do reach out, but also people that haven't been directly impacted as well. I've had conversations with partners who've just stopped and wanted to talk about this. And from that, I can tell you that domestic abuse does affect every aspect of society. It doesn't happen to just people over there or not in particular areas. It cuts across every community, every background, all faiths, all genders, and all grades at work. And I speak from personal experience of disclosures that have been made to me. I was also asked to open the government's rape review and present my story to Parliament. I got my employer involved in 16 days of activism, which is again something that you could consider as an employer. And we actually covered honour-based violence in an effort to raise awareness to other aspects of domestic abuse. As well as speaking out regularly, I now focus my energy on helping others, which is incredibly healing. I'm an ambassador for the Maggie Oliver Foundation. I work with the Consent Collective and I'm a board trustee at my local women's refuge. I also got my employers to sign up to the Employers Initiative, again, something I'd recommend you to consider. If I may, my ask, after you listening to my story, is to please have a comprehensive response to domestic abuse within your workplace. If you have private medical insurance, promote that they can actually support you. You can access therapy through this, particularly for trauma and domestic abuse. Now, whilst charities are great, I actually feel personally that it's unethical to use this as the only pathway for your people to access support. I know without my private medical insurance, it would have taken years to access support through a charity. Typically, rape crisis, their wait lists are closed. And when they do open, you're then on the wait list for 2 years. And during that time is when you really need that support. You can develop unhealthy coping mechanisms. I certainly wouldn't be here speaking to you today without that support. I realise I'm one of the lucky ones, right? Because I did have private healthcare. It shouldn't be down to who you work for or where you live. It should be offered the norm and offered without question. After all, we wouldn't accept people walking around the office with open, visible wounds. So we also need to help people with their hidden wounds as well. I'd like to end on the following quote, which resonates with my journey of recovery. Often, it isn't the initiating trauma that causes seemingly insurmountable pain, but the lack of support after. This is where, as employers, we can make a difference and have a positive impact. And I know without the support of my employer and the therapy that I access through them, I wouldn't be here speaking to you. And I wouldn't have achieved what I have achieved in my career. I wouldn't be the mother I am today, and I wouldn't be one of the leading voices in this campaign. Thank you for listening.
Kat, thank you so much. And I want to say, as I'm sure everybody who is listening to what you've just shared with us, that it's terrible that you went through the trauma that you went through, but I can only say that you're an absolute marvel in terms of how you've made that terrible situation into something that I'm sure can help so many people. So thank you for your bravery and sharing your story, but thank you for really looking at not just the luck that an individual had to be there for you in your employment, but what you're giving back to so many other people and helping employers know that we have to be a part of the solution to help people going through traumatic events. So really, I don't know how I can stress enough how grateful we are for you and the work that you're doing. And really, you've told a very terrible story in a very beautiful way. And so thank you for that. Really is an honor to share your experience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Transitioning, you mentioned a few times that abuse can happen in different ways, and that I think is a key part of the diversity of this panel. And with that, I'd like to introduce Adrian and have him share a bit about himself and his own story that he has gone through. So Adrian, if I could ask you to unmute, please tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll hear what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Annmarie. Hi, everybody. My name is Adrian. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a survivor of abuse. My story is different to the one you've just heard, and I think my situation was unusual at the time because I'd not heard of this type of abuse before. I'll tell you a bit about my background, as this impacted how I felt during the abuse, and it also impacted the decisions I made. I served for 24 years in the armed forces in the British Army, serving with various units such as bomb disposal, communications, and also military instructor. I was used to extremely high pressure environments, having served in Northern Ireland, Iraq, and Afghanistan during conflicts, and I've been experienced into warfare. Being in the military over that period, I was exposed to what can be called as banter or remarks that wouldn't be accepted today, as they were quite often offensive, but was accepted at the time as it was just part of the environment I was working in. It was the norm in the military. It was something I dealt with at the time on my own and in my own way. And this is important to note because of the situation that occurred in my life later at home. The abuse I had happened to me at my house where I lived with my wife and my stepdaughter. The abuse I was subjected to was from a female who lived next door to me. and she would verbally abuse me, shouting through the wall at all hours of the day, and only when I was at home. The abuse would consist of obscene sexual content, racist abuse, threats to life. She would accuse me of being a member of ISIS, a rapist, a murderer, and she made threats to stab my wife and slash her throat, and also threatened to get a firearm to shoot us. We never knew what was serious and what was not at the time. The female never abused me in public, on the street, or to my face. It was always through the wall, and it would happen all day. And it made it difficult for me to prove to the police what was going on. What I want to highlight is that had the abuse come from a man, I would have probably dealt with it quite differently. I would have confronted the situation. But because this was a woman, I didn't feel comfortable to do it in case this escalated or I was accused of something that I had not done.
Adrian, can you share with us a bit more about how this made you feel and how it impacted just your day-to-day life outside the home and just getting on with normal activities?
Yeah, so as a man, I felt embarrassed that this was happening. I felt ashamed that as a man being abused by a female, I was not able to deal with this to protect my family from the abuse and the threats. My background as a soldier made this even more difficult for me to accept because this was happening in my house day in, day out. And I thought as a man, and other men would say to me, just man up. There were times when I had to move to a different room in the house to attend online work meetings so that I could not hear the abuse while I worked. There was one situation where I went round to the house, to the neighbour, to ask why she was doing this. She slammed the door in my face and then reported me to the police and that I threatened her. Within an hour of the visit to my neighbour, the police visited me. The police questioned me. I told them about the abuse, but because I had no proof at the time, all I did was receive a warning from them to stay away from her. But within an hour of the police leaving my door, the abuse started again through the wall.
I mean, I'm sure everyone would agree that this sounds absolutely awful. Can you tell us about how you began to try to resolve the situation and the amount of time that it took you to kind of go through what happened next?
Yeah, so the abuse started, and I reported it to the police probably about 6 or 7 months into the abuse. And from the first I reported it to the police, it took 3 years to reach a resolution. But for that whole 3 years, the abuse continued. I had to gather a lot of evidence by recording the abuse on my phone held to the wall and then transcribing this into the document for the police to read. The legal process took a long time to get the resolution because they had to listen to hours and hours of recordings and I had to transcribe hours and hours of recordings. Eventually, the female in question went to court. She was sentenced and convicted of racially aggravated harassment in fear of violence, and received a 48-month suspended sentence.
It's interesting juxtapositions, as Kat talked about some of the lack of response maybe that she got from the legal environment, but she had such support at work. How did this affect your relationships at work and impact at work? Can you talk about the impact that this had in your professional life?
Yeah, well, at the time of the abuse, while it was happening, I was applying for a new role at Aon. And this impacted my self-confidence for getting a new job. And it felt like something I had to deal with by myself rather than sharing it with my new manager or the team. I didn't want to burden my new manager with my personal issues as soon as I joined Aon. And to be honest, I was embarrassed by it all anyway. And I felt ashamed that, like I said, as a man, I was being verbally abused by a female and was struggling. My personal thoughts were that if I told the hiring manager that I came with a bag of personal issues, he would not offer me the job. And so I kept quiet. Aon offered me the role that I applied for, but they were not aware of my issues until I'd been in the role for about 10 months. During the period of abuse, there was a lot of pressure and stresses at home, but also at the time, and unbeknownst to me, I was also suffering from PTSD from my time in the military. And the stresses and PTSD probably impacted my relationship with my team when I joined Aon, as I probably put up a barrier which prevented me from being my normal self and possibly made them think that I was maybe standoffish or not interested just because of this barrier that I put up.
And so, Adrian, can you share with us what happened when you let your manager know, or how you were able to, again, get the comfort level or that moment of bravery to be able to share this very vulnerable aspect in your life? What was the impact of that sharing with your manager? What happened next?
So once the female had been convicted, I then found the courage to let my manager know. And this was about 10 months into the role. And Aon assisted me with the start of my counselling. And from there, I went on to counselling by Combat Stress, who are a mental health service for veterans. And I was also counselled by the NHS. I was counselled for the PTSD and the abuse that I was subjected to. And once I'd found a bit more courage to talk about the issues, I found the courage to inform the team about my experience that I was receiving, and the counselling I was getting. And my relationship with the team improved. And instead of being just work colleagues, they also became friends who now I can talk to. The counselling and support that Aon, my manager, and the team provided was key to my recovery. I would strongly recommend businesses be prepared for their employees to be able to bring these issues to the table at any stage, whether they've been working with you for a week or 2 years, 5 years, 6 years, or longer. And for anyone who is suffering from this abuse, to have the courage to talk about it and get the help they need.
Thank you. And it sounds like being in an environment where you felt comfortable talking to your manager made all the difference and provided you with another level of support after going through something very stressful and traumatizing as well. So I'll say here, thank you very much to you as well for sharing your story. And again, reiterate the impact that a leader who was supportive to you and a team that was supportive to you, how it all made a big difference in terms of helping you with your recovery from such a traumatic event. So thank you again for sharing with us.
Thank you.
At this point in time, I'm going to transition over to Rosa, who will help us understand additional types of abuse that perhaps may not immediately come to mind, that are just as real as the two stories that we've seen before, and give us some areas of advice and help and information. So Rosa, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very happy to have you, and I'll turn the mic over to you.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and thank you so much, Kat and Adrian, for sharing your stories as well. Yeah, it's really an honour to be part of this festival promoting best practice in diversity and inclusion. My name is Rosa Wilson-Garwood, and I'm the Head of Impact and Partnerships at Surviving Economic Abuse. I've been working in charities supporting women's rights for nearly 2 decades. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about economic abuse, and I hope that by the end of my talk you'll understand what economic abuse is, how our organisation engages with survivors, what are some of the signs of economic abuse, and how organisations might respond. So I'd really love you to come away from the session motivated to help your firms to create those inclusive, safe and responsive workplaces for survivors of economic abuse. And as the other panellists mentioned, I'll be speaking about economic abuse, so do step away, or if you need any further support, then please do look after yourself. So what is economic abuse? We're very fortunate that here in the UK there is a growing recognition of economic abuse. And this form of abuse involves the control of a partner, ex-partner or family member's money and finances, as well as the things that money can buy. Economic abuse can happen to anyone. 1 in 6 people in the UK, that's 10.5 million of us, has experienced economic abuse by a current or former partner. 95% of cases of domestic abuse involve economic abuse, and the effects can last a lifetime, with some victims never free of the abuser's control, often left in debt, without access to money or even a home. Economic abuse can include exerting control over income, spending, bank accounts, bills, borrowing and insurance. It can include restricting the use of things like transport and technology, which allow us to work and stay connected, as well as property, daily essentials like food and clothing. And it can also include the exploitation and sabotage of those resources. And I know over the course of this festival, you've been hearing about a wide range of areas of diversity and inclusion. And the way that survivors experience economic abuse is also impacted by many intersecting areas of discrimination and structural inequalities. So although economic abuse can happen to anyone, research shows that women experience higher rates of repeated victimisation and are much more likely to be seriously hurt or killed as a result, and are more likely to experience a wider range of coercive and controlling behaviours. Women with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to experience domestic abuse than those without. Black and minoritised women are 3 times more likely to be in precarious and insecure work contracts and are less likely to qualify for statutory sick pay. Male survivors also face specific barriers to reporting, and all of those impact on economic safety and how survivors experience workplace inclusion approaches. So we're working in a context that's really challenging. The situation faced by many victim survivors has worsened during the pandemic, and the increased demand for services suggests that lockdown has led to an increase in the severity of domestic abuse experienced, as well as more limited options to escape and safely access services or reach out to the police. So today, although many restrictions have eased, the complexity of cases we see every month continues to grow, with survivors needing longer with caseworkers to resolve their financial problems, and these challenges compounded by the growing impact of the cost of living crisis. So I can tell you a bit about what Surviving Economic Abuse is doing about this. So C, as we call ourselves, was founded 5 years ago by our CEO, Dr. Nicola Sharp-Jeffs, with a mission to raise awareness of economic abuse and transform responses to it. So thanks to the influencing efforts of Surviving Economic Abuse, in 2021, the government, for the very first time, named and defined economic abuse in the statutory definition within the Domestic Abuse Act. And thanks to our efforts, the Act also amended the Serious Crime Act to extend the offence of controlling and coercive behaviour, including economic abuse, to apply post-separation. We've now cemented our position as one of the UK's leading voice on economic abuse and have been able to reach millions with information about this form of control through print and broadcast media. We have online guides and resources for survivors. Last year, we advised Coronation Street on their coercive control storyline, reaching over 5 million people. And each year, we provide more support to frontline professionals than ever before in a range of sectors, advising on those really complex cases. We've influenced the Financial Abuse Code of Practice, and we work with stakeholders across financial services, working particularly closely with banks and debt collection firms. And we have a financial support line and casework service, which is leading to life-changing financial gains for survivors. And I'd like to just briefly tell you about one woman's story to illustrate the work that we do. So a decade on from being abused by her husband, a woman who I'll call Sarah was still facing the consequences of the coerced debt her ex-husband had created in her name. After she fled, she tried to close the joint account, but her bank refused to do so without his signature and consent. The abuser then used the account's overdraft, with the bank pursuing her for the debt. Her ex-husband also forced her to take out loans and used to scream in her face if she refused. So when Sarah called our financial support line, she was referred to the specialist casework service. She was supported and has had over £20,000 of debt written off. Sarah had anxiety and depression, but told us that writing off the debt was transformative. I can say a bit about how survivors guide all of the work that we do as well, which I think is really important and builds on the amazing experiences that Kat and Adrian have described too. So survivors work alongside us in a number of different ways, but primarily as a part of the expert by experience group that we have. And our members speak openly and honestly about what they've been through so that they can be a force for change. And that insight helps us to identify what tools and resources victim survivors need, as well as where change is required in policy and practice. Our EEG members have spoken directly with government ministers and officials in the media, and the strength and courage of these women and their insight and passion for positive change just really inspires everyone that they're in contact with and is at the heart of our work. And we're so proud to be working alongside them. Some of the telltale signs to look out for. So these have been shaped with us, with the survivors that we work with, and things that employers can look out for. So frequent absences, lateness, perhaps needing to leave work early, One survivor told us, "I was terrified of having to go away for work or even work late. I couldn't ever feel okay about leaving the kids at home. He said it wasn't his job to look after the children, and the constant anxiety shattered my professional reputation." So that quote just gives an insight into how that might impact on someone's workplace. You may see reduced quality or quantity of work or missing deadlines that's unusual for someone. You could look for changes in a way an employee communicates, perhaps many personal calls or texts or strong reactions to personal calls. One survivor told us, "I used to get loads of calls of work each day, up to 15 on some days." Perhaps someone seems anxious, withdrawn or quiet when you speak with them remotely at home in a way that they don't in the office. Physical signs and symptoms that may be unexplained. For economic abuse, conversations about wages or salary can also sometimes be warning signs. For example, if you have a colleague who doesn't seem to know whether they've received their wages or saying that they hand their wages over to their partner. We know that abusive partners can also sabotage their partners. One woman told us that, "I was always anxious about spending money up front for work expenses. Sometimes I was expected to spend £500 a month on travel and hotel costs, and it was 2 months before it was refunded. Sometimes my partner would hide the receipts so I couldn't claim the money back." So just an indication into the nature of that kind of sabotage that we often see with economic abuse. Responses to working patterns can sometimes be a sign, perhaps someone asking to take on more hours or having an extreme reaction to a change in working hours, or saying that they're unable to take on a promotion or a different role because their partner is not supportive. Now, obviously, that's not an exhaustive list, and some of those won't necessarily be signs of economic abuse, but there's some things that you can look out for. And then in terms of what employers can do to support their employees, I've had loads of really fantastic suggestions and examples already on the panel today. But just to build on those, absolutely raising awareness of domestic and economic abuse and creating those open work cultures that can break the silence on this issue. Training your staff to understand domestic and economic abuse or other forms of abuse that we've heard about today, and to spot those signs and build the confidence and skills to respond. Survivors tell us they don't mind being asked. They always have a choice whether to disclose or not. So those kind of mechanisms like the green light one that Kat mentioned are so important. Developing domestic and economic abuse policies and ensuring that people's roles and responsibilities in supporting employees are clear. We also know that economic abuse leaves survivors with practical problems that need solving, which are often complex. Navigating child maintenance systems, managing coerced debt, mortgage providers, finding furniture and white goods. So some firms choose direct financial and practical support that can also be provided to victim survivors. Time off work, security, support with the costs of short-term accommodation, travel to leave an abuser. And of course, it's really important that staff can be provided with counselling and supervision, as we've heard earlier, if they're supporting survivors of abuse, if they've experienced abuse, or if they're supporting survivors of abuse, given that the impacts of secondary trauma are also well documented. And that's signposting to the right services and organisations that survivors need. And I just wanted to very briefly just also touch on the insurance sector specifically. Insurance protection is absolutely vital, and it's important that it's made accessible to the most vulnerable. Yet we know that victim survivors of domestic abuse can often find themselves unable to access and benefit from insurance. There are many insurance challenges for victim survivors in relation to claim histories that can make it more difficult for them to access insurance. Their claims are sometimes unfairly rejected. Property and car insurance claims as a result of a damage by abusive ex-partners. Those joint policies that we know can lock victim survivors into ongoing financial relationships with abusers, and can be sabotaged or manipulated as a tool of abuse. We sit on the domestic homicide review panel at SEA, and a domestic homicide review conducted in Middlesbrough outlined how a perpetrator had taken out over 2 million in various life insurance policies on his wife before murdering her, a fact which formed the key part of the prosecution against him. So in addition to supporting your own employees, there is so much that the insurance sector can also do for your customers. On our website, we have a checklist for insurance, and we'll be publishing a new briefing note on economic and insurance later in the year. So please do check that out. And if anyone is wondering kind of what those experiencing economic abuse can do to get help, we just really want all survivors to know that they're not alone. We believe you, and we have resources and expertise built from working alongside survivors to help you to recover and move forward. So we have a survivor forum, which is a safe and supportive space for survivors to share their experience. The I Need Help section of our website has loads of information and resources, how to de-link financially from an abuser, to advice on housing, property, debt and banking. And the financial support line and casework service aims to empower people who've experienced abuse to regain control of their finances. And advisors on the line will always take their safety and well-being into account when giving advice. And we never have more than a 3-week wait to join the service. So if you'd really like to find out more information about our work, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And you can find out all more about our resources on our website, as well as ways to get involved and support us.
Thank you, Rosa, for, again, your amazing insight and advice into something that people might not necessarily, you know, without your wise sharing, understand as a form of abuse. And so I think your resources are incredible. And it's also, I think, so important, even if for people helping a friend, a family member, whether it's us as individuals or just giving us the tools to help one another. I think it's so important. And one of the things to me, I think that's a real takeaway that you shared with us, and Kat, and even through Adrian's story really came out, is oftentimes there are clues, and it's not just about the person who's experiencing something. Being brave is not just based on them. We all have to be brave enough to be able to ask a question that we're afraid to ask. I think you said that most people don't mind being asked because they will share what they feel ready to share, but in a way, we're all kind of responsible for each other to help make sure that people are aware that there is support systems out there, and that the workplace is really a part of a person's life, and we have an onus of care to make sure that our colleagues, our team members, whether they're direct reporting relationships or not, that we can really come together and leverage the support that we have through the workplace environments. And so I just thought that was such a very simple but very clear takeaway that I know I learned from too, that we don't want to ever make somebody feel awkward or embarrassed, but to take the risk to ask, are you okay? And notice those signs like you shared around conversations. So I thought that was just incredibly insightful. And so I'll really say again for the group, thank you for sharing this information. I'll share as a reminder that we'll share that information as a follow-up. And at this point in time, what I thought we could do is I have some questions that have come through, and I don't know if there are new questions that are coming through, but I will ask, and again, for the panelists, Rosa, Kat, Adrian, I'll pose a couple of questions, and I'll offer you the opportunity to contribute to the conversation or decline. There's no pressure at all. From Adrian and Kat, you really shared that you had some individuals that were helpful to you. But my question is, would it have made a difference to you if your employer had a policy on the support that's available from them if you needed assistance with your abusive situations? Again, you had individual circumstances, but could it have been something that would have made it easier for you if you knew about a policy? So any thoughts that you'd like to share about that? And sort of Rosa as well, from your area of expertise, if you found those things to be differentiators or not from some of the people that you've assisted. Kat, do you want to start?
In answer to your question, it would have made a huge difference, because having a policy that's out there explicitly says this is a safe place for you to come and ask for help. Without it, you don't know what the reaction's going to be. I may have a really sympathetic line manager, but HR may not know how to deal with this, or may well have advised her to do something differently. So when an employer puts out a policy that's supportive and lists out kind of this is what you can expect, this is what you can ask for, would have made a huge difference. I also would have felt that I am doing the right thing, right, rather than I'm taking a gamble here. I don't even know what work can do. So in answer to your question, yes, would have made a huge difference.
it seems to me, even for somebody who, manages people, it's helpful to me to learn, because you want to be able to support those people and know what tools you have. So I think that it works in both ways. I'll just pause for a moment and see if anybody else wants to add on to that particular question. Adrian, it looks like you've come off mute, so I'll ask if you want to add your thoughts.
Yes, so well-being is very important within Aon, and I think had I known how important well-being was within the business when I joined the company, I may have had the courage more quickly to approach my manager and approach Aon for counselling. So maybe it's the idea to bring it in at the induction stage of a company, so that when I'm joining the company, I know that well-being is an important thing within the company, as opposed to maybe me seeking it out on the portal, because it's not being signposted as well
Sure.
as it is now. And since COVID, I think the signpost for well-being and abuse and everything to do with well-being is a lot better. But maybe at the induction stage, if something can be mentioned, I might have the courage after 1 week, take my manager, actually, I'm going through this and I need some help.
I think that's a really valid point, and I think oftentimes we feel more able to share when we already have trust established. And as a new employee, you're still working to build that trust in you, and also feel that trust in others. So I think that's a really incredible, takeaway to think about it as being part of the onboarding practice, to really even share the culture of an organization, as you mentioned, is so critical at Aon. So I think that's a very important thing to talk about in terms of transitional times before those relationships are built, to know that you have that security and that ethos of care from the workplace. So thank you for sharing that, Adrian. I'll just pause a moment in case Rosa has anything to add, but no pressure. Okay. I know we talked about this, Rosa, you shared, but I think we're just seeing a bit more question coming through. So even if we want to just reiterate, what are the practical tips for getting support if you're suffering from economic abuse? I think it's worthy of repeating. Rosa, if you wouldn't mind sharing that again. It's a question that's come through. And then certainly if Kat or Adrian want to talk about other practical steps of getting support, I think that would be helpful to everybody. Rosa, can I direct that question to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, when someone feels able to share with someone, that's a really important step. And we have lots of resources on our website for if you are supporting someone, or if you're someone who is disclosed to. Our organisation has a support line, and and if necessary, then you'll be referred on to a kind of more specialist kind of casework service to really go through the kind of individual kind of financial circumstances for that person. So I think, speaking up, getting into the right kind of channels for support, and there are many across the UK, from local services to national lines, and as we've outlined today, many of those employer initiatives, there are some really good work going on, across kind of employers. So if you can take that first step to ask for support, and to familiarise yourself as well with what economic abuse is. It's amazing how many women contact us and say, I didn't have a name for this thing that I was experiencing. We've got some really accessible kind of videos on our website that talk through some of those things, which can be subtle. They can start off slowly. Sometimes they can feel like someone is, perhaps they're protecting you or they're looking after you, and but actually, form eventually part of a bigger pattern of coercive and controlling behaviours. But those kind of warning signs around, restriction, control, sabotage or exploitation of kind of economic and financial resources are really important to look out for. And we've got lots of examples of those on our website.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, something I think of is, as if we're individuals and organizations that want to provide support to somebody who we may think is again, going through stressful experiences and have some of those characteristics you shared, like the concern over paychecks not being deposited correctly, or the stress over being communicating or being, overly occupied on the phone at work, instead of thinking of it in terms of a way of what this person isn't working to say. Wow, is something going on that we can help this person with? I thought that was really insightful information, and really a segue to the next question was, I'd love to hear from those of you again on the line who want to share is, what can we do to really approach somebody who we may suspect is suffering from some sort of abuse? I don't know, again, I'll leave it open to you all to unmute yourselves and share with us any tips you can give to anybody listening on the line that wants to be helpful. What advice would you give them from your point of view in terms of how to approach those people? I'll pause and see if one of you would like to start that. It looks like, Kat, you're the first off mute. So if you'd like to share with us, how could we, think about saying, I want to help you without, again, upsetting the person as minimally as possible, but really making sure they understand they have support?
Ask them if they're okay, and then ask them again. I remember hearing a talk from the Hart brothers, Luke and Ryan Hart, and their mother and sister were tragically killed by their abusive father when they left. And I distinctly remember him saying, if only somebody had asked me if I was okay at work, but not the usual, hi, how are you? You okay? Are you okay, Kat? No, are you really okay? Green light to talk. Simple as that. Be genuine, be honest, and listen. Don't try, if there are awkward pauses, allow that individual is clearly, going to be quite emotional, could be, for a number of reasons, might not be able to speak, but give them that space and reassure them is what I would say.
And I'm just going to say this for those of you on the line. I know it was a learning experience for me, but even just the concept of the Ask Twice campaign, like Kat, you just did there, is instead of maybe looking at somebody and thinking about there's an issue with productivity, thinking of it in a kinder way to say, are you all right? And really trying to give them that permission to share something that is very, very hard to share. Adrian, it looks like you've come off mute. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I think for me, the situation I was in, I was hoping they would ask, but I was also dreading they would ask.
I can imagine.
I wouldn't know what my answer was going to be, because I was so embarrassed by the situation I was in. I would have probably said, no, I'm fine. But if they had asked again, then maybe I would have maybe answered. But in my heart, I probably wanted them to ask, but I was also scared of them asking me as well.
I can imagine how challenging that is, and maybe that's even, again, just a reminder in terms of asking, maybe on that particular day somebody's not ready to share, but another day maybe they are, and maybe you're kind of that first line of really somebody being able to reach out for the help that they desperately need but aren't sure exactly how to get, and providing that support. Thank you, Adrian, for sharing that too. Rosa, would you like to add some additional thoughts?
Thank you. That I think it's also about creating those spaces where the conversations around abuse, they continue throughout the year, that they continue as new staff come and go. It's not just a policy on a piece of paper, but it's about the sort of living, breathing like culture of the organisations that keep the conversation going. I think in 20 years nearly of running kind of, events, workshops, sessions around, various forms of violence against women and girls, I don't think I've ever done one where someone doesn't disclose afterwards, or on the lunch break, or having a cup of tea, on the balcony afterwards. Those kind of conversations and awareness raising kind of throughout the year also create those spaces where people have trust that they can come forward, and it's on the agenda as well. So I think those are really important, training, awareness raising for your organisations, throughout the year.
I think that's so insightful and so core to the theme of this year's dive in, which again is focused on creating braver cultures, and I think a lot about this, and I think you have all displayed that you've been brave as individuals, but I think the point that we're trying to really drive home is that we need to be not just brave individuals, but brave culturally, and create those environments, and talk about the things like Adrian mentioned in terms of onboarding, and kind of bringing in conversations that perhaps historically have not happened in the workplace, and sort of making sure that they're okay rather than stigmatized in the workplace, to help support people through those journeys. So again, Rosa, another really insightful comment about when we're talking about things, it creates this space and almost gives people maybe a level of self-permission to share something that they're going through as individuals as well. Following along that line of thought, do you have any tips for how businesses can prepare to have these discussions with their team members, whether it's new employees or otherwise? How do we prepare as businesses to have these discussions? Any insight? Kat, would you like to go ahead?
I think being open and explicit about what as an organisation you stand for, and being open and explicit that you will support people who are affected by this, whether there's something they're going through now, or something that happened 20 years ago, or was in kind of the family setting. Don't feel you have to do this all alone either. If an employer is listening to this and thinking, where do I start? There are plenty of organisations out there that you can tap into who will guide you through this. You know, another of the big four tapped into Hestia, for example, and they business partnered with them to develop a whole program around this. So don't feel that you have to start from scratch and not be guided through this. I think one thing that's really important to highlight as well is we're focusing a lot on individuals impacted by domestic abuse, but often when you make that first disclosure, it can really make or break you. If you've got somebody who's willing to listen and be supportive, that like my line manager was, you know, that was just, you know, the key to all of this. If you're asking line managers to do this without any kind of training, there's a danger there that the disclosure could go very wrongly. So support for your line managers as well in terms of how to handle a disclosure, and also it could be triggering for them. So where do they go to for support as well?
I think that's brilliant insight. And again, I'm going to punctuate one of the things you said is organizations don't have to start from scratch. There is, and I think Rosa's comments and the work that you've done in various organizations have really demonstrate that there are resources out there, and that again, we can all think about how do we create those safe spaces, and how do we learn ourselves how to try to handle things optimally, rather than perhaps put somebody in an even more fragile situation, whether it's economically, emotionally, or otherwise. And I think that's key, and a really, really important takeaway. We are down to just a minute or so left to end on kind of just an acknowledgement of the journey that you have been on. Adrian, Catherine, Rosa, is there anything else that you'd like to sort of leave in terms of parting thoughts about the journey of recovery and getting the right level of support and the impact it's made? I think thematically you've shared that, but I want to give you all the voices on the call today one more opportunity, if you want to share kind of that there is hope and there is resource out there to others, and how you've been able to leverage that.
Yeah, can I just say that you know, all forms of abuse are they're not wanted in life, but for the men out there that are being abused by a female, don't be embarrassed by it like I have been, and actually I probably still am a little bit in my heart, still embarrassed by it. You know, we hear a lot about, you know, male to female abuse, you know, and that's predominantly what it is percentage wise. But for the men out there, don't be embarrassed, you know, approach people and seek the help that there is, because it can destroy you, as it nearly did me, because I was too embarrassed to tell friends and family. And I've got a lot of friends out there who I served with 24 years, and none of them still don't know because I'm still too embarrassed to tell them, but try not to be embarrassed.
I think that we could all agree that for anybody, the key is to try to put that to the side and look for the support that can help you so much. And so thank you, Adrian and Kat and Rosa. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and the experience of others, but also for sharing ways that we can all create better cultures in our organizations and to support individuals who are going through challenging times and help them get on the road to recovery. I think that's a nice way to wrap this session up. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending up a follow-up with any additional questions that have come through and some materials. Again, I can't thank you three enough. It was a pleasure to get to know you, and thank you for sharing your journeys and again, your brilliant advice. And I wish you all the best. And with that, we will sign off, and I'll leave that over to the control people to do that. Enjoy the rest of Dive In, and I hope you all get great learning experiences from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.